Hey, welcome to the latest episode of the Edgar Burroughs podcast, where we celebrate the work of the greatest adventure writer of the 20th century. My name is Tim DeForest. I am the author of several books on the early 20th century popular culture, such as the pulp magazines that Burroughs normally published his works in. And today, I will just say before my podcast co-hosts introduce themselves, I'm going to say that we are going to be talking about Burroughs' novel, I Am a Barbarian, which was unpublished in his lifetime. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. So Jess, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Jess Terrell, and you might know me from Facebook, where I am the lead admin at the Facebook discussion group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs. 6,500 plus strong. We talk ERB, pertinent era 24/7. Would love to have you join us for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
And I'm Scott Stewart, setting up new studio space in the beautiful state of Colorado. We'll be bringing out products a little later this year for a randomized spotlight, and you can bet a lot of it's going to have to do with Barbarians, jungle adventures, and all good things, ERB.
Okay, and well, let's see. Yep, before we start talking about the book today, I believe I just heard the Apes of Kershak reminding us that before we jump into our discussion of the novel, we do have several special features this time around. Jess, you were at the Dum Dum in San Antonio last week, weren't you?
Yes, indeed, I was.
Do you have a report for us?
By golly, I just happen to have one here handy. Shall I go through it?
Sure, I think so.
All right. Dum Dum ran from June 2 to June 4. This was indeed in San Antonio, organized by Jim Goodwin, who helps me out as a fellow admin there at For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs, a longtime bibliophile, and he's been involved with some Dum Dums and fan gatherings before. Jim always does a fine job, and by golly, his attention to detail was certainly on display in this event. It was a well-run event. It was from June 2 to June 4, San Antonio, as stated. Attendance was just under 50, one or two shy of 50, which is a good turnout. Our first day, June 2, provided us with the tour of Buckhorn Hall of Harns. I took perhaps 200 pictures in this place. It was room after room after room of primarily stuffed animals from all walks of life. Yeah, stuffed animals from all walks of life and all around the world. It was a really fascinating display. And also in that same facility was the Texas Rangers Museum, which I really was deeply moved by. The Texas Rangers I'm familiar with are cowboys on television, but these were real life lawmen during certainly back in the Wild West days, but also most definitely coming forward into the 20th century, into the 21st century. People who, as they say in the Jedi business, people who protected the innocent and preserved the peace. In fact, I even, with all due reverence and respect intended, I describe them as the Jedi Knights of the Lone Star State. And I mean that with the utmost respect. That particular exhibit was very moving to me. Lots of fine pictures, lots of displays of uniforms, big hats, and the weaponry that they use, all of which was very interesting. That was the Texas Ranger Museum there as a part of the Buckhorn Hall of Harns. You could spend an afternoon in this place easily. And they serve food too. On top of everything else, they serve food. And I saw some cold, refreshing beverages of various alcoholic content wondering about, but I did not partake of those. Also on that same day, this being June 2, we visited the Alamo, paid reverence there, and also went down to the Riverwalk. And now walking during all of this, by the way. Beautiful area, the Riverwalk, lots of shops, outdoor patio type areas, restaurants and businesses there lined up and down the Riverwalk that goes on for a few miles. It's a great, if you go to San Antonio, you got to visit the Riverwalk. Probably ought to stop by and pay homage to the Alamo, and as stated, Buckhorn Hall of Harns can fix you up with some good food. So that was June 2nd. Now, so June 3 and 4 were presentations. Now, the hotel where the facility hosted the Dum Dum for what year is this? 2022. That facility was the Drury Plaza Hotel San Antonio, North Stone Oak. Let me repeat that just in case, because I do recommend this hotel. Excuse me. If you're going to San Antonio, I encourage dropping by and at least drop by and take a look. If you don't stay there, the Drury Plaza Hotel, San Antonio, North Stone Oak. The staff there was wonderful, and being a night owl, I was up in the middle of the night looking for something to drink or something to munch on. Don't tell anybody I said that. And the staff there was very accommodating. Our reservation included breakfast and dinner. And the only thing you really needed to fend for yourself on was lunch. And there was a nice restaurant, I believe the name was Embers, nice restaurant there right in the parking lot within easy walking distance. So it just doesn't get any better than that. Now, for the Dum Dum for this year, 2022, forgive me. I've been time traveling recently, so my clock is off. The guest of honor was Doug Klaba. Now, he's the artist well known among Burroughs fans. He's done the most recent Tarzan book, Tarzan and the Forest of Stone, which is on the verge of being released. I think pre-orders are underway for that now. He did the cover for Lee Strong's Untamed Polluster, did some interior art for Tarzan trilogy, Tom Zajak's book. He also did the cover and interior for Terrible Tenderfoot. Now, attendees to the Dum Dum received a copy of Terrible Tenderfoot, which you might know as the Deputy Sheriff of Comanche County. Terrible Tenderfoot was the original title. And as I said, the cover art there was done by Doug Klaba. It's really a fine looking piece. Doug has done a couple of other recent artworks. He's just this year, he released one for Law of Opar, which is, I'll say, very enchanting and fascinating. And he's got some other ones coming out, and he's always done a good job, always done a fine job. I'd say now he's at the peak of his game. That's Doug Klaba. Presentations. Now we did have a huckster room that included about 12 to 15 vendors. I was pretty busy. I did not get to spend as much quality time with them as I would have liked to, but certainly a fine array of Burroughs and Tarzan and related such stuff, books and that sort of thing. Presentations, Jim Gerlach of erbooks.com, not to be confused with ERB Inc. This is a separate company, but Jim Gerlach's company, erbooks.com, are the ones that produce those collectible volumes of the classic ERB. They're all classic, of course. Of the significant, they're all significant, of course. They produce extreme collectible copies of these books. They've already done Back to the Stone Age. ERB Books has done Land of Terror, and they've done Savage Polluster. They've also released, I think it's called the Artist Edition for Princess of Mars, and the Publisher Edition for Tarzan of the Apes. And at present, they're working on another extreme edition for At the Earth's Core. So Jim Gerlach brought us up to date on that. He says that they are on schedule. I don't have the time frame in front of me, but he says they're on schedule. They've had some hangups and problems, as is often the case in manufacturing. Nothing unusual about that, but he says that they're on target for whatever the deadline was that he had announced earlier. And I can look that up. If you need me to, contact me via my Facebook group, and I'll get you a more specific date on that. Now, other presentations, we have one. There was one by Roland Trinery, who was an expert on Mahlon Blaine, or Mahlon Blaine is the way I pronounce it. Mr. Blaine was known for his artwork on the Canaveral editions. It was artwork that was a little different approach, I would say. And my take on Mahlon Blaine's artwork is you about have to look through it. Don't focus on simply what's there, but also focus on what's not there. It's something that at first glance you might say, gee, that's peculiar. But then after you begin looking at it for a while and you change your perspective, it's much, much easier to appreciate. So Mr. Trinery spoke about Mahlon Blaine there for a good period of time. I say probably about half an hour, if not more. Gary Buckingham brought us up to date on his Tarzan and the Lion of Judah, a fine looking book that he's got in the works. Now, ERB Inc. Could not be there. Christopher Paul Carey came down with a cold. It was not COVID, so far as I understood. We did come down with a cold that pretty much sidelined him. And Kathy Wilbanks, who was also scheduled to come down from ERB Inc., was exposed to COVID. So as a precaution, she was not traveling. So they could not make it. They did send a PowerPoint presentation they'd already prepared, did send that out, and yours truly volunteered to present it. So I did, and I felt I did a decent job. Really, all it was just stepping through the current products, the things that are coming soon, and things in the works, and that sort of thing coming from ERB Inc. Doug Klaba also spoke once he arrived there in the afternoon. He talked about his work on the Terrible Tenderfoot book, what a thrill it is to work with ERB fans, and we all appreciate his work. And always, he was thrilled to be visiting San Antonio, of course. Talk more about Doug here in just a moment. Henry Franke of the Burroughs Bibliophiles did a very informative talk on Tarzan comic strips. And I came back, yours truly here, Jess Terrell came back for another presentation talking about, imagine this, Edgar Rice Burroughs on Facebook, something I know just a little bit about, where we're talked about what's involved in getting on Facebook, what kinds of things do we do in my discussion group. Also talked about some of the other discussion groups talking about things that they're discussing, which is pretty much the same thing I'm discussing. And of course, paid homage to Bill Hillman of ERB Zine. As I stated in my talk, you can't talk about Burroughs on Facebook without mentioning Bill Hillman, the model that we all follow and who sets the pace for us. And Bill's a good friend, and was glad to mention him publicly there. There's a good panel on fanzines. Mike Conrad, Bill Ross, two longtime bibliophile members, Roland Trinnery, who was had in that discussion about Milan Blaine, and also Jason Hardy, who currently turns out a fanzine that I have the pleasure of writing for once in a while. They talked about the fanzines of the past and fanzines going forward, and concluding there is still a market for Burroughs themed fanzines. I certainly encourage them to stick with it. I think that's an essential part of Burroughs fandom. It's certainly the way, it used to be the way that we all communicated and found out all the news and reviews and things we needed to know as Burroughs fans. And while social media and more modern ways of communication perhaps have supplemented that, I think there's still a need for fanzines, so I encourage them to continue. We had the traditional auction, as usually accompanies both the Burroughs Dum Dum fan gathering event that we had here, and Eckhoff does a similar thing. The banquet was at a restaurant called La Margarita. It was downtown in San Antonio. Mike Chapman, longtime Burroughs fan and enthusiast who's hosted a few Dum Dums himself, was the speaker at that banquet. Spoke primarily on some of the movie Tarzans, folks like Ron Ely, of course, Jock Mahoney, Lex Barker, and Mr. Chapman also has a long history in the field of professional wrestling, so told us some interesting stories there. It was a well-orchestrated event. Proud to see it happen. And I tell you, my only complaint is it went way too fast. I didn't get to spend as much time with everyone that I would have liked to have. Alan Hansen, for example, the Burroughs expert extraordinaire, was there. I did not get to talk with him as much as I would have liked to. And there were several others that it was just, hi, how are you? I got to get to the next presentation or something like that. But it was a great event. Really encourage y'all to keep the Dum Dum in mind for next year. Not sure what the plans are for next year, but I'm sure there will be one someplace. And that's yours truly's report from Dum Dum for 2022.
It just sounds like it was a great event. I am sorry I wasn't able to be there.
If I may interject, some, not all, but some of the presentations were recorded. Some were broadcast live over a webcast. I was not aware they were going to do that. My understanding, may have been a decision at the last minute. I had not seen any announcements about that. My understanding is that some of these presentations that were filmed will be available on the Burroughs Bibliophiles YouTube channel here later on. I've been watching for that, but gee whiz, they could be on there now. I haven't had time to check today. They might be on there next week, or it could be next month. I would say just check periodically or ask us over at For the Love of All Things Edgar Rice Burroughs, because I am keeping tabs on that. But some of the presentations I think were very good and informative, and I think well worth your time. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. I just appreciate that report. It was very complete and interesting, and it makes me wish I was there even more than I already was wishing I had been there.
Well, the report is hot off the press. It's still steaming, but thank you very much.
So, okay, and I said we were going to have 2 features today before the book. The other one is our inaugural ERB podcast trivia contest, and we have a prize to give out for this. We have a copy of the new authorized edition of Tarzan at the Earth's Core. This is the hardcover edition of the book with a new cover by Joe Jusko that literally takes your breath away. As does, I think, every cover he's doing for that series. It's just magnificent work. So you can win a copy of this book. And seriously, the cover alone is more than enough reason for wanting it. But Tarzan at the Earth's Core is also just a superb adventure novel in its own right. So,
if I may jump in, this series of books from the Authorized Library produced by ERB Inc. also includes a couple of features. They've got some very informative forwards in them that really go into some in-depth detail and afterwards. And they also have an archival section. And by that, I mean, it's material, images, documents is a good word, paperwork from years ago, back about the time this book was created or connected to the book in some fashion. Some of the stuff has not been seen by the public before. So as a Burroughs enthusiast, historian, a collector, this kind of stuff is very exciting to me. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That makes the book, I think, even a more valuable prize for anyone who wins the trivia contest. So in just a moment, I'll explain how the trivia contest is going to work, but you really want to win this book. Even if you already bought a copy, an extra copy to like beat people over the head when they've said they've never read Burroughs would be a good idea. So in just a moment, I am going to ask a trivia question. If you know the answer, email it to us at edgarsmailbag@gmail.com. That address will also be in the show notes. You can find it there. Now, don't answer the question on any of the social media platforms on which you find the podcast. If you see us on Facebook, on Apple Podcasts, on Audible, whatever, if you want to leave comments there telling us how awesome we are, that's great. But the only official answers will be the ones sent to edgarsmailbag@gmail.com. This is the only way we can do it so that I can make sure I haven't missed any answers out there.
Tim, excuse me, I would presume that email address, edgarsmailbag@gmail.com, is all one word with no spaces, no embedded blanks, no apostrophes or anything of that.
All just one word.
Very good.
So if you know the answer, send it to the Gmail. And to qualify for the prize, we are recording this in mid-June of 2022. So on July 5th of this year, July 5th, 2022, I will randomly pick a winner from all the right answers. I know that a lot of people who listen here are Burroughs experts, so more than one of you is going to know the answer or be able to find it. So that random selection from all the right answers, that will be the person who wins the book. I will email back that person to get a mailing address and have it in the mail to you fairly promptly. So if you're listening to this after July 5th, 2022, I'm afraid the deadline is for entering will have passed. So our apologies to anybody listening to this on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, 200 years from now. You've missed your chance.
But we'll probably have another contest, say, the next time we do a podcast. Is that first?
Oh, yeah, we should make this a regular feature. But I doubt we'll still be giving out prizes in the year 2350. So
I'm optimistic.
Unless, of course, you get Captain Kirk to slingshot around the sun and come back in time and enter the contest there. So that's a possibility. Also, because of postal costs, we do have to limit contestants to the United States. I know we have a few listeners in England, and we apologize that we can't include you. You blame the post office for that. That's not our fault. So here's the question. While growing up with the apes of Kershak, Tarzan had a teenage crush on a young she-ape. What was the name of this she-ape? So remember, if you know the answer, email it to us at edgarsmailbag@gmail.com. The email address will also be in the show notes. And here's the question one more time. While growing up with the apes of Kershak, Tarzan had a teenage crush on a young she-ape. What was the name of the she-ape? So email us that answer before July 5th, and you'll be in the drawing to win a copy of the new authorized edition of Tarzan at the Earth's Core. So onto the novel, onto our actual main feature for the show. I Am a Barbarian was written in 1941, but it wasn't published in Burroughs' lifetime. It first saw print as a hardcover in 1967. And Ace Books also brought out a paperback with a fantastic Boris Vallejo cover on it. It's one of Burroughs' least known novels. In fact, unlike pretty much everything else he wrote, it's not currently in print, at least not at the time of this podcast. Author Richard Lupoff, who wrote an very important book about Burroughs, had this to say about I Am a Barbarian, and this is a quote. This lightly fictionalized biography of the Emperor Caligula, as told by the slave Britannicus, is a radical departure in style and attitude from any other work of Burroughs. In my opinion, it is an excellent work, one of his best and deserving of wide attention, unquote. And I kind of agree with that sentiment. I think it is an excellent book. It is very different in a lot of ways from Burroughs' other work. But it is an excellent novel. It really just draws you in. And before we start our summary of the novel, I want to first express my continued appreciation for the ERB summary project that can be found at erblist.com for the excellent work there in providing us with a chapter-by-chapter summaries of all of Burroughs' work. It's a great resource for us when we prepare these podcasts. We do read the novels ourselves, but when we're preparing summaries, that project there helps means we don't forget a key point when we're doing that. Now, because this novel is different from ERB's other works, with the inclusion of a lot of political maneuvering, a lot of assassinations and seductions, a lot of Roman names, we're going to organize our discussion a little differently than we normally do. I'm going to briefly summarize the book 5 chapters at a time, then we're going to pause for some in-depth discussion. So you guys ready? I'm going to start with the summary of the first 5 chapters.
Well, I have something to say, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I can't let much time wander by without saying something. I wanted to point out that this story, I Am a Barbarian, is one of several fine adventures over at edgarriceburroughs.com/comics. This is a web comic. It's been presented as a web comic. There's 200 plus, I can get you an exact number, there's 200 plus panels for this story, I Am a Barbarian, written by Tom Simmons, artwork by Mike Dubish, and letters by L. Jamal Walton. They're all doing a fine job. In fact, they've done such a fine job, the story is now complete, and the book is in print. We talked about the actual prose novel, I Am a Barbarian, not being in print. That's very true. There are old copies to be had if you look around on eBay and things of that nature. But you cannot walk into a bookstore or order online a brand new copy, as Tim stated. However, there is a collected volume of the webcomic I just mentioned, 200 plus episodes, with written by Tom Simmons, artwork by Mike Dubish, letters by Jamal Walton. As I mentioned just a moment ago, this volume is available. It is for sale. It is presently being sold. And I'll get you I don't want to mess it up. I'll get you the website where it can be ordered from. But we'll be sure to mention this book. It's a fine story. They've all done an extraordinary job with it. I went through it extensively today, in fact, and I already knew this because I've been a fan of the webcomic. But I would encourage you to take a look at I Am a Barbarian, the webcomic version by Tom Simmons, artwork Mike Dubish, and letters L. Jamal Walton. All right, that's my plug. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, I will make sure I put the link to where you can buy that in the show notes. So check.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that because I'll probably mess it up when I'm trying to spell it.
Okay, so here's the first 5 chapters. The book is presented as the translated memoirs of Britannicus, who spent 25 years as a slave to Caligula, the mad Roman emperor, though Caligula is only 4 years old when we first meet him. The memoir is dedicated to Britannicus's son, Numerius Tiber Britannicus. Now, Britannicus, usually called Brit, and that's how we'll be referring to him, is 10 years old when the novel starts. His father is the chieftain of a tribe of Britons, and his grandfather had been a king. Brit's dad had launched an ill-advised attack on the Belgians. He had captured some ships in Dover, sailed across to the continent, and attacked the Belgians there. who defeated and enslaved the tribe. They were sold to the Germans, and then the Germans were captured by the Romans, and along with them were their slaves. So Brit and his father and mother become slaves to the Romans. The commander of the Roman force is Germanicus. His wife is the mean-spirited and paranoid Agrippina, and their spoiled brat of a son is the 4-year-old Caligula. Caligula is known as Little Boots, and his main talent as a toddler is screaming until he gets his way. He's given Britannicus as a personal slave, and Britannicus, by the way, is very proud of his heritage, and especially for a child, he has a lot of courage. So when Little Boots spits on him, Brit slaps him, and Brit then runs for his life, and he ends up befriending a soldier and an ex-gladiator named Tiber. Tiber isn't too bright, but he's intensely loyal to his friends, and he's going to end up being my personal favorite character in the book. Anyway, because Little Boots wants Brit back, he's not put to death for the slap. The family returns to Rome. Brit is impressed with the size of the city, but nothing he sees about the Roman citizens impresses him. He thinks the leadership is cruel and incompetent. He thinks that free government handouts have made the average citizen lazy and corrupt. Brit sees his parents one more time when they're paraded as captives in front of the crowds. After that, he never sees them again. We also see that though Germanicus is a nice guy himself, his wife and his kids are all cruel and rotten. The kids all hate each other. It's not a sibling rivalry thing. They literally have a murderous hatred for one another. And they're always trying to hurt one another. Their mom, Agrippina, is quite horrible. Brit runs away again when she's angry with him. Remember that Brit is a slave, and Agrippina could put him to death at her whim. He takes refuge with Tiber, who's now with the Praetorian Guard, but Little Boots screams whenever Brit's not around, and that keeps him alive. Now, when Brit is 5 years old, or when Little Boots is 5 years old, he begins to get his schooling. Brit is there as well, and thus he learns to read and write. He becomes familiar with the works of Homer and Livy and Cicero. He also learns from Tiber, who is a font of wild stories about war and murder, death, and gladiator fights. Now, Brit has an adventure in chapter 3 when he runs away yet again to avoid punishment. He gets into a fight with a Roman boy and gets tossed into prison, where a couple of thugs fight over who gets to abuse him. Fortunately, when it's discovered he belongs to Caligula, he's released. Germanicus promises to protect him so that he doesn't keep running away. And Germanicus is then assigned to a post in Syria. So this section ends with the family sailing to that country. While leaving Rome, Brit sees bodies floating in the river. Tiber, who's coming along, tells him this is where Brit's parents probably ended up. So Brit vows to hate Romans forever and to one day kill a Caesar. So that's a summary of the first 5 chapters. Once again, there's a lot of political maneuvering and assassinations and plots going on here that would just take too long and be too difficult to summarize. It's a very rich novel. And in 5 short chapters, as you just heard, we got a lot of basic information in there and several little mini adventures for Brit. So one thing I want to say is how quickly and effectively Burroughs gives us Brit's history and sets up the whole situation. Anything you guys want to say about the first 5 chapters?
Go ahead, Jess, if you want.
Who, me? Well, I was chomping at the bit. Thank you so much. Several things here to mention, which I probably could have mentioned before we got underway, but they're kind of recurring themes and things I'll be thinking about. And I've actually been thinking about these since we started discussing this book, since we started discussing the idea of discussing this book. These are all things that have occurred to me as I've gone through and examined it. Excuse me. First of all, I'll say villain for one of our better word is Little Brit. His real name is Caligula. And if you know anything about Roman emperors, which I don't profess to, but that's one name I do know, he has quite the reputation, a real life reputation, I mean. But we'll see more of this as the story develops, and Tim's already touched upon it. I think it begs the question, this story is an example of the question for a youngster, for a child. Is behavior learned or is it inherited? and it probably depends on different situations, but while reading this story, I'm wondering how much of this, that Little Boots, Caligula, was how much he was born just with a natural inclination to be mean, or is it something he learned from somebody else? And another point is, go ahead, someone say something?
Yeah, I was going to say in regards to that, and that's an excellent point. I hadn't thought about that particular thing. It's obvious that little Boots is spoiled rotten. When he doesn't get his way, when Britt isn't around, for instance, he simply screams. No one tries to discipline him, give him a timeout, teach him better. They just give in to him. So part of Caligula's lack of character, and I think also his viciousness when he grows up, you can credit to how he was raised. Because if you're not given discipline and taught a sense of right and wrong when you're little, you're not going to have that when you're a grown up. And we can see that as an example of what happens when you just spoil a kid rotten and never try to teach him right from wrong, or never try and instill any discipline. So I hadn't thought about that aspect of it at all. But I think you could probably argue that the story leans on that behavior is learned rather than inherited. That being said, Caligula does have epilepsy. He might have physiological problems that contribute to his insanity later in life, but he's a rotten person because he was allowed to grow up to be a rotten person.
And I agree with you on both points. Of course, epilepsy is something a person can't help. Mm-hmm. I'm fully aware of that, and I don't mean to downplay the importance of that. But to your point, his mom, Agrippina, or whatever her name is, she's I'll say a witch herself, and I'm using that term in a general statement. I don't mean she's hitting the brew or potions or anything, but I mean she's just mean, and that's kind of who I was thinking of inherited. His dad, Germanicus, is the one person who will attempt to correct him. He spanks him on a couple of occasions. I think probably needed to do that a few more times. But granted, epilepsy is a serious condition. I don't want to downplay that.
I should say his epilepsy by itself is not what makes him evil. It is, it's his being brought up. And Germanicus did try to discipline him a few times, but mostly he just let Agrippa in turn allow Little Boots to have his way and everything.
Very well. Another point I wanted to make, and Scott, do jump in here. Don't let me hog it all.
Oh, I'm brewing a vat of stuff of what I'm listening to both you mention to put it into a summary when you're done.
Oh, that'd be a good thing. That would work. I think it's ironic that the person that this story calls a barbarian is probably the most civilized, and that would be a Brit. Certainly as he grows up and begins to develop some adult type perspective on things based on his childhood, as most of us are. He's the one he's called a barbarian, but he doesn't behave that way. Other things here, I for whatever reason, I would say that the Little Boots / Caligula is making a descent into madness throughout this story. That's it's his personal trauma. But because of that, and because he's a leader in the community, in the country, he is triggering a descent into chaos for society. And also this sparks a management technique that I've seen in the real world of everyone trying to please the boss, because the boss can't be pleased. And those who can please him can do whatever outlandish thing he wants are the ones that will get to some level of approval. If it's nothing more than smile or nod, which maybe you've forgotten 5 minutes ago, 5 minutes from now, you get that brief approval trying to please the boss. Unfortunately for an organization, I'm thinking in terms of business, but heck, it works for countries too. And that it draws you away from your main objectives. Everyone gets wrapped up in trying to please the boss. They're not moving the company forward, or in this case, they're not moving the country forward. And its citizens are being ignored and sometimes even punished or damaged from this. All right, that's enough for me for the moment. Y'all go ahead.
Okay. Part of what I wanted to open up with here too is I'd be curious about the book itself. There are times when I'm reading it, I'm wondering if ERB had put it away with plans come back to polish it, which I think he did, because overall it's an incredible book. There's a ton of information in here. It's a fictionalized account, but he obviously did his homework. A lot of research, and that's listed in the beginning where they have that sort of a open thing where it says we got, took the original script and went through these references where they sort of like he's done with Tarzan books where he goes, well, I met with Lord Greystoke and stuff, sets it within the imaginary world, but backs it up with some reference points. But I'm curious because there are things like he used a lot for the main character for Brit, would say, I am the great grandson of Singiturus, his great grandfather's name. But sometimes it's sort of like it was almost in there as a placemaker that maybe he wanted to say something else instead of repeating with the same thing. And some of the things are a little an anachronism in some of the speech. And I know they say they in the kind of fictional, factual opening notes, taking the speech so modern readers can understand it more. But I found like the use of the word brat and chap, like that's the sort of chap he was, didn't seem to fit in with that. So I know when they took the manuscript, I'm wondering if they basically did it verbatim, if they had talked about doing some polishing. Overall, the story, everything else is really great. Those are just a couple interesting things. I'd like to find out more about the history of how they put that, brought this manuscript to light the way they did. I think there could be some interesting stuff in there. The other thing we're talking about, like the are actions learned or are they inherited? If you go to the other side, I think Brit's a good example of how he was raised and how he said he learned his lessons on how you act with people and take care of people. And that's where he wears with the pride of I am a barbarian, and I'm proud of that because those are his roots. This is what he knows. He knows how their society and culture works, and feels that the Roman citizenship, the city, the empire, which we know ended up imploding, collapsing in time as empires do, but got too rich for itself or too full of itself or too lazy for itself. The intrigue of the families and relations of all those Caesar-bound people, Nero and Caligula, Claudius, which was turned into a mini-series years ago called I, Claudius. The intrigue and treachery within the families, immediate families themselves, is incredible. And you go into history books and you can read this, and Edgar Rice Burroughs brings this right out. He is, compared to his other writings, though he can sometimes show forces of brutality, this one, well, I won't say something that happens later on with some children and stuff, but the jail part with the abuse of one man saying, no, he's my boy, when Brit's in there and stuff, was quite bold and I think open-faced to be addressed in something he wrote in the 50s and which was published in the 60s. It's a very different context in which he tells the story. And again, with Brit being the narrator, telling the story from where he is. I appreciate sometimes because he's telling it like a story. He's not giving every single point. However, I felt in the first couple of chapters, it took a little bit for me to really warm into it. By the fourth and fifth chapter, I just going in and reading it and enjoying it. The first part, I thought, I want to use the word dry, but as a different approach. I remember having some difficulty years ago, first reading it. I appreciated it more this time. But when I picked it up, I'm also a huge Robert E. Howard fan, and Conan, Solomon Kane. I was kind of expecting more of an adventure. Britt is not Conan, but he's not supposed to be. This really is much more like a historical memoir, but he doesn't pull punches. Life back then was very brutal. I may be forgetting other stuff too. I'll stop now, but these are observations I got, especially from the beginning of the book and what you guys have said that continues forward.
Yeah, but you made some really good points. The title, I Am a Barbarian, really, you realize it is a statement of pride, and that Britt never has anything but contempt for any of the Romans and for Roman society. And it's interesting that he's not awed of it or scared of it or all. He knows when he's in danger, he knows it, but he's not impressed at all on any sort of moral or emotional level by Rome. And he just thinks that his people were probably more civilized than that they had a more honest and vibrant society than what he sees in Rome. So I Am a Barbarian definitely is a statement of pride for him. And it reminds me a little of Tarzan's attitude towards civilization. He can operate in civilization and have friends there, but he prefers the jungle because of he's just like annoyed by the basic hypocrisies and corruptions within civilization that he doesn't find in the jungle.
The animals are more civilized than civilization.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention before we move on is that Burroughs, he wrote this in 1941, and he's obviously using Roman politics, particularly his remarks about government handouts being bad for the character of the people, has an implicit criticism of New Deal politics and of FDR's administration. And I just want to point that out. We're not going to be political ourselves at all and comment on what our political views are, because we just want every Burroughs fan, conservative or liberal, to enjoy this talk. But Burroughs obviously disliked the New Deal politics and disliked the idea of government handouts. I don't think he lacked compassion at all for people who needed help. He just didn't think it was the government just blindly handing out money as he saw it was the best way of handling it. And this isn't the only time in his work he gets political. We did an episode on the Pirates of Venus, where you remember the bad guys in that were obviously a representative of the Soviet Union, of what would have been Stalin's Soviet Union at the time. And he was very critical of it. We were thinking of doing Tarzan and the Ant-Man next time, Ant-Man, and that has criticisms of prohibition built into it and how the Ant-Man society works. So Burroughs did get political sometimes in using his fictional stories to comment on current politics, and he definitely did this here. Okay, any other comments for you before we do the next 5 chapters?
Nothing for me.
Okay. Now so chapters 6 through 10, and remember, they have gone. Germanicus and his family, along with Britt as a slave, are in Syria, and there's political shenanigans going on there. And Germanicus dies while over there. And when that happens, the already paranoid Agrippina is convinced he was poisoned. Now, the family returns to Rome, and 10 years pass pretty quickly. So Britt is now a young man, and Caligula is a still very spoiled teenager. And during this time, Britt has become quite a scholar in writing and in literature. When he's 18, Britt delivers a letter to another house. After this, he hears a scream in an alley. This introduces us to the beautiful Belgian slave Attica, who's 15 at the time, and who's a slave in another household. She's being attacked by 2 men. Britt saves her from the attackers, but one of them later dies from this later on. And because of the way the circumstances worked out, Britt's friend Tiber is accused of murdering the man. Britt offers to confess that he indeed killed the guy in order to save his friend, but Tiber refuses to let him. While this is going on, Caligula and Britt attend the chariot races. Britt wins money betting on the races. He meets Attica again, and later on he meets a chariot racer named Numerius. And for much of the novel, Britt and Numerius will be competing for Attica's heart. They both love her. But despite this, the two will become lifelong friends. So they say all is fair in love and war, but Brit and Numerius don't subscribe to that. They stay friends, and their competition for Atticus' heart never interferes with that. But when Tiber is arrested for murder, and then he's convicted and sentenced to serve in the mines for the rest of his life, Brit steps up to confess and save his friends. And this is an incredible act of courage, because as a slave, he's going to be crucified. So chapter 10 ends with Brit being tossed into prison, just looking forward to a horrible, painful death. Not looking forward, but knowing that that's what's in store for him. So any comments on this one from you guys?
Well, I have to give a shout out to Numericus. His attitude of approaching this and this relationship issue between he, the young lady, and Brit, approaching this as a gentleman. Mm-hmm. That is, he wanted to win the girl's affections fair and square. He saw it as a challenge, sure, but a gentleman. He approached it as a gentleman, which is just not what I expected out of Roman behavior here. So maybe there's hope for that society after all. But I was impressed by that. That surprised me. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I like Numerius too, and I think it's a nice contrast, since Brit is mostly critical of Roman behavior. It is a nice contrast to have some individual Romans in there who are not evil and who are sometimes honorable.
I liked it too. The fact that it didn't just become a rival in love or Archie and Reggie type thing, or deadly enemies like Ben-Hur's best friend becomes. Here, I really liked the way he set up and handled it. Wasn't what I was expecting, and it was heartwarming.
It really was. I think Burroughs is deliberately contrasting the loyalty that the supposedly lower class characters like Brit and Tiber and Numerius have for each other. He's contrasting that with the corruption and the completely evil character of most of the upper class characters. So,
I'd go along with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else before we go on to chapters 11 through 15?
Oh, just a brief thought about Germanicus, Little Boots, Caligula's father passing away. In this society, I tell you, it reminds me a little bit about Burroughs' Land of Time Forgot, the Wirus there, where assassination is a way of life for them. So far as Germanicus passing, this would be Caligula's father. Mm-hmm. I'm probably butchering the name, but it starts out G-E-R, I know that much. So far as his passing away, it's entirely possible that somebody did him in. Now, there's probably a long list of suspects here if the police were investigating, and they're not. There's probably a long list of possibilities of people who might have poisoned him. And I think his wife even shouted poison, I think, as you said. But you have to add to that list family members. Now, his children are a little old to be suspects, but in a few years, they'll be old enough to be suspects for that kind of thing. So that's something we have to look forward to. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay. No, those are once again great comments. So I was going to go on starting with chapter 11 then. Okay, so and this is the book's most suspenseful scene. Brit is taken out to be crucified. Tiber shows up in the nick of time with a pardon. So Brit is free all of a sudden, just seconds before he's nailed to the cross. So Brit returns to the family. In the meantime, the emperor at this time is Tiberius, and his son has died. And this moves members of the Germanicus family all closer to the throne. And it intensifies their plotting against one another. And in the meantime, Brit ends up driving in the chariot races. There's some ups and downs in his wooing of Attica when letters to one another fail to get delivered. And she's also very slow in deciding between Brit and Numerius. I like Attica, but she was like toying with these guys far longer than she should have. Brit overhears Agrippina plotting to assassinate Tiberius, the current Caesar. So Brit and Tiberius have met, and they do have a mutual respect for one another. So Brit secretly carries a warning to the emperor. There are betrayals and plots and seductions and lies among the family and among other important Romans. Agrippina ends up dying in prison, and Caligula begins to have occasional epileptic seizures. Other characters die or killed. And by the time Tiberius dies, strangled by Caligula, actually, Caligula is there to take the throne. So he's an adult by now, but he's a completely wackadoodle adult. And as this section ends, chapter 15 ends, he is now the emperor with pretty much unlimited power throughout the Roman Empire. These chapters, that contrast between Brit and his friends with the increasingly corrupt Romans, I think it becomes even more striking than it was. It really is a theme in this novel that I don't know if it's like power and wealth corrupts or a lot of people. I think that might be one of the points that Burroughs is making, because you have most of the lower class people are at least loyal to each other and support each other, whereas the upper class people are always backstabbing each other to get more power and money than they already have. Any comments from you guys?
Well, this just about popped out of me. There is a statement, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I don't know the origin of that. I mean, I first heard it on the original Star Trek, of course, where I get most of my information from. But absolute power corrupts absolutely, meaning that those who are in power, who have total power, are more apt to scheme and cheat in order to expand their amount of power. They become power hungry. And I think perhaps that's what we're seeing here. All right, go ahead.
No, I agree. I also want to say that the scene leading up to Brit almost being crucified is incredibly intense. It is one of the most suspenseful bits of prose I've ever read.
Crucifixion is probably, go ahead. Excuse me, Scott. I was just going to say crucifixion is probably the thing, for whatever reason, that Brit, if he feared anything, he feared crucifixion. Go ahead, Scott. Finish your thought, please.
I was just going to say, yeah, like the last section we covered, chapters 5 through 11 or 10, however that was, is, as I'd said earlier, where I started just scooping up and reading as opposed to catching up with the history and all that. And then, of course, obviously the trial and the crucifixion, all that. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm just going to do one more page here before going to bed, or whatever. and you keep on flipping it. But I could see, like, he's in there in like the jailer Sunshine, they call Sunshine. Now I could like see a movie where it's someone like Peter Lorre. And now they're not necessarily sadistic, but I could just sort of, yes, well, I don't want to be mean about it, but, when they put that spike through your hand, it's going to hurt. But boy, when they put it through your feet, you're going to scream because it really hurts. You're going to scream. And he keeps saying that every day. He goes, I feel bad for you, boy, but sorry, I can't help you die sooner because it's going to really hurt.
Yeah. I had the impression that he was actually trying to be comforting, but was just really terrible at it.
Exactly. That's where he isn't trying to be mean. He doesn't know anything else to talk about.
Yeah.
Don't worry. I'll have you strung up here in just a minute.
Like when he said, I'll tell you what, I like you. I'm going to try not to miss the spike too much and hit your hands.
Scott, I've got to hand it to you for that voice impression you did a minute ago. I mean, you had me shaking in my shoes here.
I don't do good impressions, but I can make weird sounding noises.
Well, I tell you, suddenly I had visions of me being strung up, and I didn't like the idea of that.
Well, I think it's important to note actually that Brit doesn't like Roman society and he doesn't like Romans in general, but he does recognize that there are good Romans. For instance, he did respect Tiberius, the emperor, and thought he wasn't a completely horrible leader at the least. So it's not a racial bigotry that Brit feels. It's his actual honest and well-founded opinion that Roman society itself is corrupt.
He recognizes there are exceptions to that rule.
Yes, he does.
The warrior friend of his, Tibor,
yeah.
He respects him a great deal. Even what's his name? Even little Boots Caligula, like Tibor.
Yeah. Yes, and so I think that's an important part of the novel. Actually, if he just blindly hated every Roman, it would come across as just a bigotry. But because he's able to respect those few Romans he runs into who are good people, then his opinion of Roman society is an honest one based on a real opinion of their moral failings, and not just a blind bigoted opinion.
It's the individual versus the entire collection or entire society.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, the last actually 6 chapters, it's 21 chapters, so we'll finish with chapters 16 through 21. Caligula is now the emperor, and Brit discovers that people now fawn over Brit for favors. He's still a slave, remember, but people will come to him because they know he's Caligula's favorite to try and get favors. Caligula, though, has moved permanently into crazy town. He's just completely nuts. He sees plots against him everywhere. He forces those he sees as enemies to commit suicide. He frequently has people executed and often forces family members to kill each other. He spends money lavishly, and then he raises taxes to replenish the treasury. He steals wives from other men, marries them, and then divorces them, sometimes in a matter of days. And though he's a coward, he makes several awkward attempts to fake military victories. Brit, by this time, he's tempted to kill Caligula himself, but he can't bring himself to violate the trust that the emperor has in him. Brit comes close to being executed himself when he loses a chariot race, and he loses it because he avoids running over his friend Numerius. Numerius crashes, and if Brit has just run over him, he could have stayed in first place, but he swerves around him and loses the race because of that. Caligula lost a fortune betting on Brit, but he still spares him. Instead, he executes the man who won the bet and then confiscates his estate. Attica, in the meantime, finally confesses her love for Brit. The two are married, and they eventually have a son. But Caligula's misrule is making him more and more unpopular. So he plans a 5 days of games to win the people back over to him. At one point, though, his troops force people from the stands into the arena where wild animals have been released. This includes Attica, and that leads to a great action scene where Brit jumps into the arena to save her from a tiger. And he succeeds only because Tiber jumps in as well to help. That would be the action scene in the novel, in my opinion. And by now, even Caligula's own guards are plotting against him. And this is what happened in real life. The Praetorian guards did end up killing the emperor. But Caligula still has time for one more act of perverse evil. Brit's sent away from the palace to deliver a message. When he returns, he finds Attica dying from slashed wrists. Her last word is Caesar, implying she killed herself to keep from being raped by Caligula. So Brit runs to find Caligula, finding him just as the guards are stabbing him. Caligula cries for Brit to help, but Brit stabs him as well. Tiber and Numerius urge him to flee Rome, but he refuses their help rather than endanger them. He tells Tiber he regrets that Tiber is a Roman, and the book ends with Tiber telling him, "I'm not a Roman, I'm a Greek. You never knew that?" And that's where the novel comes to an end. One thing I will say is we know Brit survives after this because he wrote all this down for his son, but Burroughs doesn't provide us any details about what happened to Brit afterwards. Scott, I think this is one example that stood out in my mind, that if this had been published when Burroughs was still alive, he might have done one more rewrite on it. It had a clearer ending to what happened with Brit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I know that Tom Simmons in the comic strip does give a slightly clearer, a much more clearer answer to Brit's fate. But Burroughs doesn't cover that. We don't know for sure how Brit managed to survive this afterwards or what happened to him.
I think it would have been a controversial book too. I think for good or bad, this is so different from his other books, and the blatant brutality of some of the things that are in here, I think would have there would have been a lot of eye-opening by people.
Yeah, I think he's much more open about rapes than he is in the other books. He just always has that. He often has that as a threat for his women characters. Yeah. But here he's more overt about that threat. And the first time Brit was in prison as a kid, the two guys who were fighting over him obviously wanted to abuse him in the most horrible way possible. So if there might have been some controversy if it had been printed in 1941 because of just how graphic those scenes are.
Well, there was also an incident with Britt and a family member, which I won't go into detail because it's a very awkward thing to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
But it was certainly inappropriate. I'll say that, and that's covered in there also.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not a criticism of the book. I think those.
Oh no, not at all.
Those evil acts needed to be in there to just to make the point of the danger to Brit and the corruption of Roman society, but they were pretty graphic for the time the book was first written. Mm-hmm. Maybe
not gratuitous, but it's more open than usual.
Yeah, it is. And maybe if he'd been, of course, he spent many of his remaining years as the world's oldest war correspondent, which is maybe one reason why he never got back to it in his lifetime. Maybe if he'd given it one more run, it'd be interesting to see if he would have toned that down, or since he was writing in a different style from usual, maybe he would have left it in. Who knows? We sadly will never know what Burroughs may have done with the book before it was being published.
I'm sorry, just to say, even with the differences, obviously, as this being a book he wrote then, I think people can get a good idea of some of the things we're talking about in the movie Gladiator, when you're talking about the interfamily situations, despising each other or attracted to each other, and just the way they rule politically, and very little life means anything to them. That's why they can wager on them being shredded apart by animals or by bigger and stronger gladiators and stuff. It's you like the stadium scene when they're all forced into the arena with the wild animals or whatever. I can kind of see the Russell Crowe and the other things, fights and stuff in the stadiums, in the arenas, similar to that. So people get a feeling, they would know that this book has that kind of tone to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Well, if we presume, we don't know for sure, if we presume that Burroughs would have done one more rewrite before it was published, then it's a remarkable testament to his skill that this is still a great novel, even if it wasn't quite as polished as he wanted it to be published. So because it's still a great novel. I do think Brit, just the ending without an indication of what happened to Brit, was a little bit of a disappointment, but that doesn't ruin the novel for me at all. It's still a superb book.
I wanted to, if we're done with that, I just wanted to mention that the incident of the tiger in the arena and Brit jumping in there with a sword to save a young lady. That artwork, that image has been reproduced at least a couple times, perhaps others. Mike Dubish and with Jamal Walton, who's done the artwork for the webcomics, covered that. And what they turned into is a promotional picture for these webcomics. And also Boris Vallejo, who did the cover for I Am Barbarian for one of the paperback editions, focused on that same scene. That's I'm looking at it right now. It's extraordinary artwork there. Of course, Boris always does a fine job, no question about that.
Boris does. I always put Boris and Frazetta together in my mind.
Me too.
Me personally liking Frazetta a little bit better, but then Boris will do a cover like that one, which kind of like, okay, maybe I should jump him ahead. So they were both superb artists.
Exactly. But I also, while I have the floor, there are several actions. This certainly is a story of drama and intrigue and backstabbing. Sometimes backstabbing with a real knife. But this story definitely does have action scenes in it, and the action scenes in the webcomic version, which I mentioned, written by Tom Simmons and then the artwork by Dubish and Walton. Those action scenes are well presented. They tell you what you need to know, leave a little bit of room for the imagination. Chariot races, for example, bareback horse racing, and feeding the audience to the lions. Yes, feeding the audience to the lions on a slow day at the arena.
Yeah.
And other things too. Those things are all presented. Oh, some of the majesty of Rome, the great buildings and structures, Colosseum, that sort of thing are seen in there. It's all very
Yeah,
very, very epic.
I think that was the one part of Rome that Britt was impressed with was their architecture.
He said he was impressed. So he says he's impressed. That tells me he's impressed.
Yeah. So now I remember when Jess, when I posted a review of this on your Facebook group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs, I said that I thought of it as a fictionalized biography of Caligula. And the Richard Lupoff quote I read earlier kind of says the same thing. Tom Simmons, who wrote the comic strip, was very kind to reply to that and say that he thought of it as the book is mainly the love story between Britt and Attica wrapped around that biography. So if you guys had to pick one, Britt's story or Caligula's biography as being the primary theme, which one would you take?
Well, I've always thought of this book as historical fiction, which is akin to the first thing you said. But Burroughs certainly is a romanticist at heart. Most everything he's written has got a love story of some kind in it. But there may be some exceptions, but I sure can't think of any. So there's going to be romance. At least I expect to see romance in a Burroughs story, and we have it here. If I have to choose only one, and we know how hard that can be, then I will opt for historical fiction. But I say it's a close call. Go ahead, Scott.
It is a close call. Yeah,
I would. I see it both. The central theme being historical biography, fictionalized of Caligula, and also when you mentioned that a love of brotherhood and love story wrapped around three characters. Well, I actually look at more as, if you want to call it, the traditional hero's journey. He's writing down his notes to give to his kids and his grandkids, to his son, saying, this is what happened to me growing up. These are things you may or may not expect to know, but this is what influenced me. Although completely different, another book like that, Little Big Man, where they're not all connected. They jump around in different years, but these are highlights. These are influential patterns and experiences in my life, which has brought me to this point.
I love that. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, looking at it as a hero's journey is another legitimate way of looking at it. I think in the end, all those aspects of the book are important to make it what it is. So they're all vital to it, whichever one we pick is like the main theme.
Carefully woven blanket.
It really is. It's just Burroughs was always good at plot construction and weaving different plot threads together, and I think that's really highlighted here in this novel.
But I'm glad you all brought up Hero's Journey. Yes, something I should have said. So I'm glad you all mentioned that. Generally, the Burroughs stories fit the Hero's Journey litmus test very well. And litmus test is my term for identifying Hero's Journey, but it certainly applies here. So I'm glad you all mentioned that.
Okay, well, we're coming up to the end here. Do you have any other last comments on I Am a Barbarian? I think we've done a pretty good job of covering it.
Well, I'm going to mention something just because being from another generation and remembering some of the literature and movie history going on, for people who may not be as familiar with some of the Roman empires or the name Caligula, about 50 years ago, there's a movie called Caligula, which was very gratuitous. I've not seen it. I read enough about it. In fact, I don't think I was old enough to go see it when it came out, but it was produced by Bob Guccione, who used to be a publisher of Penthouse. And they took the historical character Caligula, what many people thought of or knew of him, to make this complete, huge, multi-sexual orgy of death and killing and every hedonistic type of, some people might call it pleasure, entertainment that they might do incorporated it. And that naturally brought people back then, the name Caligula brought that thing up, like of this completely demented, over sexualized over death, killing appetite. I don't know what other phrases you that this emperor was. You know, he along. I mean, yeah, you got people like Nero and other things. That there's a, and I'm not picking on the Roman Empire. You can read about whether in Asia or Eurasia or Europe or all over the world, of different kingdoms and leaders and stuff. But there was that point in the Roman history where it's very well known for the corruption and for the deviation and a wanton lifestyles that went on. But the number one thing most of them tried to keep in mind was self-preservation. And when they let themselves get into their psyche or into their what they deemed as entertainment and pleasure too deep, that's usually when the tables turned, because they weren't seeing what was happening around them, that in another day or two they're going to be dead. So just that the name Caligula for a long time has brought up the idea of complete evil.
Yeah. And I think the real life Caligula, probably along with Emperor Nero, who came a little while longer afterwards, they probably deserve those reputations, because they were truly evil men who wielded absolute power and killed a lot of innocent people just because they wanted to. So Caligula was not a nice guy. I think we can definitely take that away from the book. So okay, so that I just appreciate both of you guys being here for this discussion. I think both of you made great points, stuff I hadn't thought of, and I believe this was a worthwhile discussion. And for those people listening who have not read I Am a Barbarian, it's not in print when we're recording this in mid-June 2022, but hopefully we have hopes it will be soon, since the comic book edition is out. Perhaps that will give impetus to republishing the original work. But even if you have to look for a used copy, it's very much worth reading. It is just a great novel, and we hope we've succeeded in giving you a sense of just how great a story and how thematically rich it is. And that's going to be it for this time. Next time, we will be talking about Tarzan and the Ant-Men, which is just another great Burroughs story. Probably is completely different from I Am a Barbarian as you can get, but it is a wonderful adventure story. So Scott and Jess, you got anything you guys want to say before we sign out?
Well, I would certainly like to add a couple more words. As far as I know, I'll be conducting an interview with writer Tom Simmons regarding the webcomic edition for I Am a Barbarian, a book that is very much out and available. We'll be spending a few minutes talking about how that came together and some of the challenges there that they overcame. That's I Am Barbarian from cedarrunpublications.com. This is a webcomic, meaning it is very much illustrated, but it also, I think, captures the flavor of the story. cedarrunpublications.com, that is one word. C as in cat, E as in Earl, D as in dog, A as in apple, R as in Robert, U as in Ulysses, N as in Nancy, P as in publications, then U as in Ulysses, B as in Bob, L as in licorice, I as in interesting, C as in cat, A as in apple, T as in Tom, I as in Irving, O as in N as in Nancy, and S as in Sam. cedarrunpublications.com, one word, no blanks, no dashes, no hyphens, no underlines, cedarrunpublications.com. So be sure to pick up a copy of this.
I will make sure that's in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much. I hope you all could understand my ciphering there on the how to spell it. I ran out of 26 letters in the alphabet. That wasn't enough. But anyhow, enjoy this. Oh, so be on the lookout for my interview with Tom. That'll be coming up soon, as we say. And certainly enjoyed tonight's session as always. My gratitude to both of you.
Thank you. Scott, anything you want to say or plug before we?
Yes, thank you for having me along on this ride. I knew when we talked about doing this book a couple months ago, we're going to have a fun time discussing it. And I hope the listeners out there enjoyed it too, because it really is a different approach for Burroughs and a very enjoyable one.
Okay, and finally, my name again is Tim DeForest. You can find my blog at Comics, Old Time Radio, and other cool stuff, and find a link to my books there, which you can purchase and make me rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And we will be back soon with another full-length episode. And also, I will try to do more of the mini podcast where we talk about adventure writers who were contemporary to Burroughs or may have been his influences.
Excuse me, one more thing, if I may interrupt. Be sure to drop by and visit with us on Facebook for love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yes, always a fun site.
All right, go ahead, Tim. Continue, please.
That's all. Well, that was it, though. So I will see everybody. Well, you will hear from us soon. You'll hear from us in the future soon. Goodbye.